She had always been a symbol of strength, a warrior princess from a distant star system known for her fierce loyalty and unyielding resolve. Her people had once thrived in a peaceful federation, their advanced technology and wisdom allowing them to flourish. But that was before the betrayal. Before the day her own kin, the very ones she had pledged her life to protect, sold her into bondage. The auction was a blur of flashing lights, cold stares, and foreign voices. She stood on the stage, bound and silent, as the crowd of alien buyers made their bids. She had been stripped of her title, her dignity, and everything she had ever known. A pawn in the game of power between galactic factions. She was nothing more than a commodity to them. The weight of the chains that bound her wrists was nothing compared to the crushing realization that her people had abandoned her to this fate. But amidst the throngs of wealthy bidders and unscrupulous traders, there was one man who saw her, not as a piece of property, but as a person, a human, a species that had always been underestimated and regarded as primitive by the galactic elite. He stood at the back of the room, observing quietly, his eyes focused not on the price tag, but on the woman herself. His name was Jace, an explorer, a wanderer, with a heart far larger than the galaxy he roamed. He had heard stories of the once proud star system, of the fierce warrior who had fought beside her people to defend their home. He had never imagined meeting her in such a place, nor had he ever thought he'd find himself moved by the injustice she suffered. When the bidding started, Jace didn't hesitate. The numbers on the screen climbed higher, but it was not the price that mattered. What mattered was the spark of defiance in her eyes, the strength still lingering beneath the surface. She wasn't broken. Not yet. And he wasn't going to let them break her. The final bid came, and with it, the winning bidder's smile, only to vanish as Jace stepped forward, his voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd. "I'll take her." The room fell silent. The auctioneer blinked, confused. "Sir, do you understand the price?" Jace nodded, his gaze never leaving the woman in chains. "I understand." With a quick exchange, the chains were unlocked, and she was free. But the freedom she felt was not just physical. It was a sudden release from the years of oppression, from the shame, the loss, and the betrayal. The moment the chains fell to the floor, she breathed deeply, her first true breath in what felt like forever. She looked at Jace then, not with suspicion or gratitude, but with something more profound, a recognition. She had seen many battles, but never had she encountered a force like the human standing before her. He had no ulterior motive, no ambition to claim her as a prize or use her for political gain. He was simply there to help. "I owe you my life," she said, her voice steady despite the raw emotion that threatened to break through. Jace smiled softly, his hands raised in mock surrender. "I didn't do it for gratitude. I did it because it was the right thing to do." Her brow furrowed, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of hope. There was something in Jace's eyes that was unlike anything she had seen in the galaxy. A kind of untainted purity, a willingness to do good without expectation. It was a stark contrast to the world she had known, where every action was calculated and self-serving. As the two of them left the auction hall, the weight of her past began to lift. Her people may have betrayed her, but Jace's love, his unwavering belief in doing what was right, was setting her free in ways she had never imagined. She had been bound by chains, yes, but those chains had been nothing compared to the ones that had shackled her heart. In the days that followed, she began to understand what true freedom was. It wasn't just about escaping the bonds of her captors, it was about discovering the courage to heal, to trust again, to love. She had been betrayed and bound, but in Jace's love, she found the strength to rise again. Not as the warrior princess she had once been, but as something new. A woman capable of forging her own destiny. And together, they would face whatever the galaxy had in store. Because in the end, the greatest power was not in the stars, nor in the hands of those who wielded them. It was in the hearts of those who had the courage to love. The days after her rescue were a blur of strange new beginnings. Jace had taken her to a secluded world on the outer rim, a place untouched by the politics and wars of the galaxy. It was a paradise, a refuge for those who needed to escape the chaos of interstellar life. The air was clean, the waters pristine, and the land seemed to breathe with life. But despite the serenity of the planet, the warrior within her could not rest. She had been trained for combat since childhood, her body honed for battle, her mind sharp with strategy. Her past could not be erased by a change in scenery. The memories of betrayal, of the cold, heartless auction, were still fresh in her mind. And yet, in the presence of Jace, those memories began to dull, softened by the warmth of his kindness and the sincerity of his actions. Jace had offered her a place to stay, a home. He didn't ask for anything in return. He didn't even expect her to speak of her past, though she could see the curiosity in his eyes. He was patient, and that patience was something she had never known before. With him, she found herself beginning to trust again, to see the possibility of a life outside the chains of her former existence. One evening, as the twin moons of the planet rose in the sky, casting long shadows over the lush landscape, they sat by a fire. Jace had been teaching her how to cook with the native plants, an activity she had never even considered before. It was simple, almost trivial, but it made her feel human, like she was learning to be more than a soldier, more than a weapon. You know, Jace said, breaking the comfortable silence, there's a whole universe out there. So much more than we can even imagine. But sometimes, it's the little things that make life worth living. Like sitting around a fire and sharing a meal with someone who doesn't expect you to be anything other than yourself. She glanced at him, a small smile tugging at her lips. It's strange, she said quietly, to feel like I've never really lived before. I was always a tool, a weapon, a symbol. But now, I'm learning what it means to just be. Jace looked at her with a softness in his eyes. You're not a weapon, not anymore. You're free to choose your own path. The words hung in the air for a long moment, and she realized that he wasn't just speaking to her. He was speaking to himself as well. Jace, like her, had carried his own burdens. He had never fully shared his past with her, but she could sense the weight he carried in his heart. The way he helped others, the way he gave without asking for anything in return. It was as if he was trying to atone for something, even if he didn't say so. I know, she said softly, but sometimes, freedom feels like a heavy thing. Like I'm supposed to be more than what I am now. I'm afraid that if I stay here too long, I'll forget who I really am. Or worse, I'll become too much of what I was. Jace didn't respond right away. Instead, he picked up a small stone from the ground and tossed it into the fire. The flames flickered brightly, casting shadows that danced in the night. I get it, he said finally. You're not just running from the past. You're running towards something. But you can't do it alone. You never have to be alone again. She watched him for a moment, feeling something stir deep inside her. She had always been alone, even among her people. She had never let anyone get close, always keeping her distance out of fear that they would betray her, too. But Jace was different. He was the first person who had ever truly seen her, not for her title or her skills, but for who she was inside. What if I'm not strong enough to move on? She whispered, the vulnerability slipping out before she could stop it. Jace reached out, his hand resting gently on hers. Then we'll be strong together. Her heart clenched in her chest, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe it. Maybe she didn't need to carry the weight of her past alone. Maybe, just maybe, there was a future for her. One where she didn't have to fight every battle on her own. In the days that followed, something inside her began to shift. She didn't know what the future held, or what the galaxy would throw at them next. But with Jace by her side, she felt ready to face it. Their journey was just beginning, and as the twin moons cast their light across the fire, she finally felt the freedom she had longed for, the freedom to love, to trust, and to choose her own path. With Jace, she was no longer bound by the past. She was free to be who she truly was. And that was just the beginning. Weeks passed, and the peace of the secluded world began to feel like a distant memory. The stillness that had once been soothing now felt oppressive, as if the universe were holding its breath, waiting for something to shift. Jace and the woman, whose name she had revealed to him, though it was a name she had not spoken in years, spent their days working the land, learning to live without the constant hum of warfare and duty. But the galaxy had a way of calling its own back to the chaos, no matter how far they tried to run. It was late one afternoon when the first signs of change arrived. A low hum filled the air, distant but unmistakable. Jace was out gathering food when it happened, his absence leaving her alone in the quiet. She felt at first a sensation of unease, like a cold shiver running up her spine. Her training kicked in before her mind could catch up. She moved swiftly, her body instinctively going to the place where she had hidden her weaponry. A few items Jace didn't know about, ones that she had kept for emergencies, even if she promised herself she would never need them again. The sound grew louder, and soon the sky above the horizon darkened, clouds swirling with an unnatural force. The rumble of approaching ships vibrated through the ground. She stepped outside, her heart racing, her eyes scanning the skies. Her breath caught when she saw them. A fleet of ships descending from the clouds, their designs sleek and intimidating. The Federation. Her stomach clenched. They had come for her. She thought of Jace. He wouldn't be prepared for this. He had no idea what the Federation was capable of, how they would track her down. She had hoped the galaxy would forget her. But the Federation never forgot their own, especially when one of their own became a symbol of defiance. Before she could make a decision, the ships touched down on the ground, their landing gear scraping against the rocky surface. She had no time to think. Her body was already moving, her instincts taking over. She reached for her blaster, but before she could make her way to the clearing, a figure appeared from the forest, a silhouette that made her pause. Wait, Jace's voice rang out, and she froze. His figure emerged from the trees, his face a mask of concern. What's happening? She didn't have time to explain. The Federation is here. They've come for me. His expression darkened, his hand instinctively reaching for the knife he kept at his side. I won't let them take you. You don't understand, she said quickly, her voice urgent. They won't stop until I'm dead or in their custody. They'll destroy this entire planet to get me back. You have to leave. I'm not leaving you. His voice was firm, resolute. She turned to face him fully, her eyes narrowing with the weight of the truth. Jace, I've spent my whole life running from people who want to control me, who want to use me as a tool. If they capture me, everything you've done, everything we've built here, will be destroyed. He stepped closer, his hand gently brushing against hers, the warmth of his touch grounding her in a sea of swirling thoughts. Then we fight them. Together. Her heart pounded, torn between the man she had come to trust and the reality of the danger they faced. She had lived her life in the shadow of war. She had fought battles she couldn't remember, faced enemies she had never known, always alone, always fighting for survival. But Jace had given her something she hadn't known she needed, hope. The possibility of something more than endless fighting, endless loss. She turned toward the Federation fleet, her mind racing. There was no way to win a battle against them, not without help, not without resources. The Federation's reach was vast, their technology far beyond what they could possibly fight on their own. But there was one thing she had learned over the years. There was always a way, if you were willing to risk everything. I'll fight with you, she said, her voice steady. But we need a plan. We can't take them head on. Jace nodded, his expression intense. We'll find a way. We always do. As the Federation ships began to land in full force, their engines roaring in the distance, she knew there was no turning back. This would be their moment. Whether they won or lost, it didn't matter. They would stand together. She looked into Jace's eyes, seeing the determination in his face, the love that had grown between them in such a short time. And she realized something she hadn't allowed herself to believe before. She wasn't alone. For the first time in her life, she didn't have to fight for survival alone. She had a partner, someone who cared about her not for what she could do, but for who she was. Together, they would face the Federation. And no matter what happened, they would fight with everything they had. As the first wave of soldiers began to disembark from the ships, the air crackling with the tension of an impending war, the warrior woman stood tall, her heart a fire that would never be extinguished, her soul bound not by the chains of her past, but by the love that had set her free. And beside her, Jace, ready to face whatever the galaxy would throw at them, knowing that this fight was more than just survival. It was for their future, together. The Federation soldiers, clad in imposing armor, moved with the precision of a well-trained force, forming ranks as they spread out across the clearing. The low hum of their advanced weaponry filled the air, a sound that sent a shiver down the woman's spine. She had faced countless armies, but this felt different. These weren't just soldiers. They were an unstoppable force, and they had come for her. Jace stood at her side, his expression hard and focused. He had no military training, no advanced weapons at his disposal, but in his eyes burned the same fire that had fueled her for so long, the need to protect, the will to fight. Together, they had no illusions about the battle that lay ahead. But they also knew something the Federation didn't. They had the one thing the soldiers could never understand, a bond forged through love, trust, and the will to fight for each other. The woman took a deep breath and drew her weapon, the familiar weight of it comforting in her hands. She had fought many battles, but this was the first time she was truly fighting for something more than survival. This time, it was for Jace, for a future, for freedom. "We can't take them head on," she said, her voice low but determined. "But I know this land. I can use it to our advantage." Jace gave her a sharp nod. "Lead the way." They moved swiftly, using the natural terrain to hide their movements, slipping through the trees and rocky outcroppings as the Federation soldiers advanced. The first few skirmishes were fast, hit-and-run tactics, exploiting the soldiers' overconfidence. She had grown up in environments like this, learning to navigate alien landscapes, to use the environment to her advantage. It was her edge, and it was a deadly one. But as the Federation forces regrouped and began to spread out in search of them, the situation grew more dire. She knew they couldn't keep running. Eventually, the soldiers would corner them, and that would be the end. She reached into her utility belt and pulled out a small, cylindrical device, a beacon, a signal designed to call for reinforcements. She hesitated for a moment. The choice to call for outside help was risky. There was no telling who or what would come. But they didn't have time to be picky. "I'm sending out the signal," she said, looking at Jace. "Hold them off as long as you can." Jace's jaw tightened, but he didn't hesitate. "I've got your back." They separated, each moving to a different side of the battlefield. The Federation soldiers were closing in, their footsteps heavy and sure. The moment the woman activated the beacon, she heard a faint, far-off hum, a signal that her message had been received. But as she turned to rejoin Jace, she saw the Federation commander emerge from the trees, flanked by a squad of soldiers. "You can't hide forever," the commander called, his voice cold and calculating. "Your people have already abandoned you. You're nothing more than a tool to us. Surrender now, and we might let you live." The woman's eyes burned with fury, but she did not flinch. She had heard these words before. The Federation had always seen her as a weapon, a tool for their purposes. But they were wrong. She was no one's tool anymore, and she would die before she allowed them to take Jace or herself. "I am not your tool," she said, her voice steady. "And you will never have me." A fierce firefight erupted as she and Jace fought side by side. Using every ounce of skill and knowledge, they had to hold their ground. But as the battle wore on, it became clear they were outnumbered. The soldiers were relentless, pushing them back, and the terrain that had given them an edge was now a trap. Just when it seemed like the end was near, a distant roar split the air. The Federation soldiers froze for a moment, unsure. And then the sky split open with a flash of light as a fleet of ships, far larger and more powerful than the Federation's, descended upon them. The woman's heart leaped as the reinforcements arrived. Rebels, former allies who had been hiding in the fringes of the galaxy, waiting for the right moment. The signal had worked. They had come. The Federation soldiers were thrown into chaos as the battle shifted. The rebel ships fired upon the Federation fleet, their weapons cutting through the enemy ranks. On the ground, the woman and Jace fought harder, pushing the Federation forces back with the sudden advantage. The commander, now realizing the tide had turned, made a desperate attempt to escape. But Jace was there, cutting him off with a swift strike. "You lost," Jace said coldly, standing over the defeated commander. The commander sneered, bloodied but defiant. "You think this is over? The Federation will always come for you. We'll be ready." the woman said, her voice unyielding. And next time, we'll be the ones who take the fight to you. With the Federation's forces broken and scattered, the woman and Jace stood among the wreckage, panting but victorious. The battle was over, but the war was far from it. They knew their enemies would regroup, would come after them again. But it didn't matter. They had each other, and together, they were unstoppable. Jace reached out and took her hand, his grip firm and warm. "We've done it," he said quietly, as the sounds of victory echoed in the distance. The woman looked at him, her heart full. "No, we did it." And as the sun began to rise over the horizon, casting its golden light over the battlefield, she realized that this was only the beginning. Together, they would face whatever came next. Because in the end, love, human love, was the one thing the galaxy would never be able to defeat. And that was a force more powerful than any weapon in the universe.